Olivia Nuzzi is the Washington correspondent for New York Magazine. She was inside that courtroom today. Christy Greenberg is the former deputy chief of the criminal division for the Southern District of New York. She was inside the courtroom yesterday, and they both join me now. It's great to have you here. I want to just start working backwards from that ruling, the sort of last Hail Mary up to the appellate court to get it delayed and the venue changed. Did that have a chance at all, or was this like sort of like the many motions we've seen them file?
Just like the many motions. I mean, this idea that there's worse publicity in Manhattan than there is anywhere else, you know, really doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it's the 21st century. Like, they're going to find you.
Right.
and that was the argument they were making. But it does strike me, just to stay on this for a second, again, I always ask this question, like, normal, not normal. This flurry of attempts to delay the trial, to get the venue moved, all the stuff we've seen over the last week, like, that's not standard practice, right?
No, I mean, look, there are pretrial motions to move venue. I've seen those. I've dealt with those. But the fact that they keep coming every time you get shot down, you just keep saying reconsider, head it up to the next court, like, that's not normal. And
that relates to the question I want to ask you, Olivia, as someone who's covered Trump for a while now. You know, there are people in his circle who will say sometimes anonymously and sometimes named to reporters as sort of like, bring it on, like he's going to look like a martyr and it'll be good for our fundraising. And just everything seems like he really doesn't want to be there, doesn't want this to happen.
Clearly does not want to be there. I mean, when he walked in the room today, I've seen him in a lot of different settings. I've seen him in the White House, in Trump Tower, Mar-a-Lago, campaign trail, you name it. I've spent a lot of time with this man. And I was really not prepared for the sight of him in that courtroom today. It's this very drab space with this terrible lighting, and it's all kind of neutrals, and then he comes in this in Technicolor orange and with the golden hair and this kind of high blue suit, and he looks, I don't know, it's like a poppy flower or something in a desert. And it's so strange to see him in that context, but no power. He kind of sprung up at the end of this hearing after his lawyers just being completely reprimanded by the judge for these delay attempts. And he sprung up when it was over, and the judge promptly looked at him and said, "Sir, could you please sit back down?" He didn't call him Mr. President. There was no, it was not overly polite, and he had to, sink back into the seat. He has no power in there.
I mean, that really is, and the sort of physical bearing of him. And again, like, this is the nominee for one of the two major parties. It's so wild to keep reminding yourself that, because it doesn't. But if it were anyone else, it'd be like, wow, the slumped shoulders, the clear exhaustion on his face. Like, he looks very defeated by the end of the day.
I thought, oh, he's performing being very bored, right? Who could be bored and fall asleep at their own criminal trial? I mean, it seemed absurd to me. And then seeing him in there today, on the way out, you could just see how exhausted he was. He was sort of hobbling and looked like he'd just gotten off of a long-haul flight or something. And I just thought, how is he going to do this for the duration of this trial?
I want to say that today he complained about the trial being both too fast and too long. So he said that Judge Merchan is railroading me at breakneck speed in order to completely satisfy his friends. Additionally, he has gagged me so I cannot talk. This goes on forever and ever. You can look it up and read it if you want to. He also posted, this trial is a long, rigged endurance contest dealing with nasty, crooked people who want to destroy our country, MAGA 2024. On the pacing, it does seem like this week's jury selection happened quite expeditiously.
Well, when you got through each group of 96, at least 50 each time were saying, we're out of this, we can't be fair and impartial, we don't want to sit, and so they were out. And then you took these groups of 18, and once you got through the 42 questions that each of them have to be asked, that's tedious, that takes some time. But then once you got through that, which would be a few hours, the strikes themselves happened pretty quickly. So the fact that this has moved along, I think it has made a lot of sense. It is pretty consistent with what you would see in a high-profile jury case.
What do you think it will mean for Trump world to have him there every day for the next 4 weeks?
Just logistically, he's running for president, and we talked about this the other night, but the campaign and the court are sharing custody of him. He is, his Wednesdays are free, his weekends are free, maybe on Wednesdays, and, he's been planning rallies. I noticed in the tri-state area, he has one in Wildwood, New Jersey on May 11th, so they are preparing for the strange logistics of this. But I have to imagine he's also going to be very tired on days when he does not have court, and how much stamina does he really have? I don't know.
I mean, again, just to reset the facts here, the man is 77 years old. He will turn 78 by the time of the election. And there's been so much talk about Joe Biden's age. I mean, he's a 77-year-old man sitting in courthouse, facing criminal charges for the first time in his life. These are less than ideal conditions to do anything.
And he loves a busy schedule. He likes going to rallies, but he needs to feed off of a crowd of people who love him. He needs attention. He absorbs that. He comes out more energetic. This is not that.
This is the opposite of it. I mean, this is just like a pure energy sink.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the jury, because we now have 12 jurors and 6 alternates. What is your sort of impression? What are your thoughts on how this jury's come together? What the composition looks like?
Well, you have 2 lawyers on this jury, and then you have, in addition, 3 individuals who say a close family member, a spouse, parents, in-laws, are lawyers as well. So that's nearly half your jury of people who I would expect as a baseline have some respect for the law and have a sense of how it goes. I mean, even the people who are close family members, I'm guessing you have some experience with this, Chris, but lawyers, when they go home, tend to still talk about the law in their day. And so, they have some sense of how this is supposed to work, and that you respect the judge and listen to the judge's orders. You would respect counsel. You'd respect a jury. So if he starts acting up and being really disruptive, I think at a minimum, those jurors are going to really not like it. On the other hand, you also have 5 women on this jury. They're not going to like this case. They're going to have the transcript of that Access Hollywood tape that, you can do whatever you want.
Yep.
They'll let you do whatever you want. Grab them by the, they're going to hate that. I mean, I remember having a trial where the defendant had an extramarital affair, and there were 11 women on the jury. And when that evidence came out of that extramarital affair, you could see the look of disgust on those female jurors. And that didn't go well for that defendant. And I don't think this is going to go well for Donald Trump.
One of the things going into this trial is sort of question of it as, spectacle, obviously. And I actually think my sense is that it's relatively muted down there in the courthouse. This has not been some completely chaotic, frenzied scene. And then, of course, today
was
the most
chaotic.
horrific kind of disruption happened.
Yeah.
You were there during the courthouse. Described what happened.
I've been sharing the seat there with my colleague Andrew Rice, and I had just shown up when they were swearing in the jury, and soon after they were breaking for lunch. And at that time, the news broke about what happened outside. A man seemed to self-immolate. But the courthouse is sort of just this really beautiful place. You go there, and you kind of can't help but be overwhelmed by the stakes there and all of these different facets of humanity coming together. People were getting married on the corner, and then to have something like that happen. And in fairness, there's no indication, I don't think, that this was directly related to anything happening inside. This was in any way a protest.
I think it was a sort of, my sense from what we know, opportunistic, because he knew there would be a lot of media.
And a kind of a grab bag of different conspiracies from that manifesto, as far as I understand it. But the NYPD has done a pretty good job so far, both starting with the arraignment of keeping things controlled down there. So it was pretty jarring to see it today, turn into this gruesome scene.
And I got to think also, I mean, just in terms of the jurors, who I keep thinking about and keep kind of finding myself sort of relatably empathizing with, I mean, just what this would be like. It was a wildly upsetting scene. I hope, I don't know if people saw it on television, horrible, but we already heard from jurors about how afraid their nerves are. You got to think this is the last thing you want them encountering.
So I think that the court and law enforcement and security are figuring it out as they go. On Monday, being in that line to get in, the jurors, there were 50 or 60 jurors that were waiting to get in. You could identify who they were because they're all holding their juror slips. And they're right across the park from loud Trump rallies, and they're seeing all of this as they're nervously waiting to get inside.
I walked in yesterday, and I just came off the elevator, and unbeknownst to me, I walked into a pool of potential jurors.
Right.
And I had to sit there and wait for them to go through security and not take any photos. But they're not sequestered, right? So
they're not sequestered, but it does seem, at least that I didn't see in subsequent days. I didn't see them waiting for as long.
Coordinating it.
It seems like they're trying to get the hang of this a little bit.
All right, Olivia Nuzzi and Christy Greenberg, it's so great to have you both here, and thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
As had been expected for nearly a week, Israel carried out a strike on Iran overnight. It was in response to last weekend's Iranian missile and drone attack against Israel, which itself was retaliation for Israel's bombing of an Iranian embassy compound in Syria. Iranian authorities say the damage there was limited. There were no injuries, which leaves open the possibility that this is the last of these exchanges, or at least the last for this round. This is all incredibly dangerous, of course, for the people of Iran and for Israel, for our troops in the region, of which there are many, also for the world as a whole. And where it goes next depends largely on the thinking of one man, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a man who has dominated the nation's political landscape for more than a quarter of a century now, through political scandals, corruption charges, multiple offensives in Palestinian territory. He has always told Israelis that they can't quit him because he alone can protect them, as he told them on the eve of an election in 2014.
I feel the Jewish nation is under threat, and I'm prepared to mitigate that danger. It's what the state of Israel expects from me, and it's what I'll do.
It's the theme of his entire political career. You may not like me or my methods, but I will keep you safe. But the facts show just the opposite. For decades, Netanyahu has made a series of decisions that have led Israel, the region, and the world to be a more dangerous place, demonstrably less safe. You can trace this trend back to 2002, a year and a day after the September 11th attacks on America, when then Foreign Minister Netanyahu came to the U.S. and testified to Congress that it was time to invade Iraq.
The connection is not whether Iraq was directly connected to September 11th, but how do you prevent the next September 11th? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? The first victory in Afghanistan makes a second victory in Iraq that much easier. The second victory in Iraq will make the third victory that much easier too. If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region.
A guarantee. How did that turn out? Actual experts at the time predicted, quite correctly, that the Iraq war would be a catastrophe. It would not be an easy victory for the U.S. And in fact, crucially, it would be a huge boon for Iran, which it was. The Shiite majority in Iraq took the reins of the government on our watch. They formed close ties with Shiite leaders in Tehran. Iranian militias now operate out of Iraq. And that kind of tells you what Netanyahu's guarantees are worth. Nevertheless, he kept rattling sabers in the region and undermining democratic leadership. In 2015, when the Obama administration and its allies worked on a breakthrough deal with Iran to keep it from developing a nuclear weapon, Netanyahu was so opposed that his government treated its closest ally like an enemy.
Did Israel spy on the Iran nuclear talks and leak selected details to the Republicans to sink a deal?
If John Kerry is speaking to his Iranian counterpart, they could very well be listening in on that call. In fact, the officials that I spoke to basically explain it exactly that way.
Despite those efforts, that deal went through until Donald Trump scuttled it in 2018 with support from Netanyahu.
Israel fully supports President Trump's bold decision today to reject the disastrous nuclear deal with the terrorist regime in Tehran. Israel has opposed the nuclear deal from the start. The deal didn't push war further away. It actually brought it closer.
He can say that, but he's wrong. Since terminating the deal, Iran has accelerated its enrichment and its missile development, and it has only grown stronger. And that isn't even close to being the worst security miscalculation of Benjamin Netanyahu's career. No, for that, you have to go back to 2006, when Hamas militants abducted an Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, you see him there. They held him in Gaza for 5 brutal years. And bringing Shalit home became a rallying cry for many Israelis. And in 2011, hoping to put off an election that might crash his coalition, Netanyahu championed a deal with Hamas, a costly prisoner swap to return Shalit to Israel.
While there were joyous welcomes for those released, the questions about this deal started almost immediately.
Some in Israel say his release came at a very high price. In return, Israel promised to release more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, many of them serving time for terrorism and murder.
Imagine for a moment if an American president had cut a deal like that. I mean, back in 2014, President Obama released 5 Taliban prisoners to get back American soldier Bo Bergdahl, and conservatives here went apoplectic. But it wasn't just how many Netanyahu agreed to release, it was who. One of the prisoners was Yahya Sinwar, a Hamas military leader who returned home and eventually became the leader of Hamas in Gaza, and not just any leader of Hamas. Last year, Sinwar became known as the mastermind of the October 7th attacks on Israel. He came out after the attacks to warn that they were, quote, just a rehearsal. That man was in an Israeli prison and released by Benjamin Netanyahu in a 1,000-to-1 prisoner swap. Can you even imagine if an American president had released Osama bin Laden in a prisoner exchange? And then bin Laden had pulled off 9/11? Even worse, can you imagine if the U.S. then funded bin Laden? Because as the Times of Israel reported right after October 7th, for years, the various governments led by Benjamin Netanyahu took an approach that divided power between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, bringing Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to his knees while making moves that propped up the Hamas terror group, funding Hamas, giving them work permits and legitimacy as a counterbalance, a strategic choice by Netanyahu. A counterbalance of Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. The idea was to keep Palestinians from having a single unified government, one that might try and form a state and challenge Israeli authority. His entire political career is based on the idea he alone can protect this nation. All of these cynical machinations, all of this tough talk, guarantees about keeping Israelis safe. And the ultimate result was the horror of October 7th. The worst security failure in the state's history. Benjamin Netanyahu oversaw all of that. In fact, we learned from the New York Times that Israel knew of the Hamas attack plan a year ago, but Israeli military and intelligence officials dismissed the plan as aspirational, considering it too difficult for Hamas to carry out. Did Benjamin Netanyahu know? It's not clear. But either way, it is his failure. It happened under his watch. He owns it. And incredibly and inexplicably, he remains in charge of whatever comes next.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.